In 1892, a Russian expedition found a mass grave in the ruins of a city called Nishapur. The bones were piled in towers, separate towers for men, women, and children. The skulls had been removed and stacked in pyramids nearby. The archaeologists counted what they could. They estimated the remains of over 1 million people. Nishapur had been one of the great cities of the Islamic world. Libraries, mosques, gardens, poets. A center of learning that had produced Omar Khayyam, the mathematician and astronomer whose verses are still quoted today. In 1221, the Mongols came. The city resisted. A Mongol prince, a son-in-law of the Khan, was killed by an arrow from the walls. When the city fell, the Khan's daughter, the widow of the slain prince, was given the honor of deciding its fate. She ordered everyone killed. And everyone, not just the soldiers, the women, the children, the elderly, the cats and dogs. The killing took weeks. Mongol soldiers were assigned quotas. Some sources say each warrior was responsible for 300 executions. Others say 400. When they were finished, they plowed the ground with salt so nothing would grow. This was not unusual. This was policy. Here's the thing about Genghis Khan. He is remembered today with a strange kind of admiration. The great conqueror, the unifier of the steppes, the founder of the largest contiguous land empire in human history. His face appears on money in Mongolia. His name adorns hotels and vodka brands. But the scale of what he did defies modern comprehension. Demographic studies suggest that the Mongol conquests killed approximately 40 million people. Some estimates run higher. At a time when the world's total population was roughly 400 million, this means the Mongols may have killed 10% of all humans alive. The invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire alone, a campaign lasting about 2 years, may have killed 15 million people. That's more than died in all of World War I. And unlike World War I, this wasn't industrial killing. This was swords, arrows, horses. Each death required individual effort, personal attention. Over the next 30 minutes, I want to tell you about the man who ordered all of this. Not to excuse him, not to celebrate him, but to understand him. Because Genghis Khan didn't emerge from nowhere. He was made by suffering, by betrayal, by a world so brutal that his brutality was, in some terrible way, logical. And because understanding him helps us understand something about human nature that we might prefer not to know. He wasn't born Genghis Khan, that title came later. He was born Temujin sometime around 1162 in the harsh grasslands of the Mongolian steppe. The exact year is uncertain. The Mongols didn't keep written records. Everything we know about his early life comes from a single source, The Secret History of the Mongols, written after his death by unknown authors. His father was Yesuge, a minor chieftain of the Borjigan clan. His mother was Hoelun, a woman Yesuge had kidnapped from another tribe on her wedding day. This is worth pausing on. Temujin's mother was a kidnapping victim. She was riding with her new husband when Yesuge and his brothers attacked. The husband fled. Hoelun was taken. This was normal on the steppe. Women were property. Raids and abductions were how many marriages began. Temujin grew up in this world. And from his earliest years, the world taught him that survival required strength, and that mercy was weakness. According to The Secret History, he was about 9 years old when his father was poisoned by a rival tribe. Yesuge had stopped to eat with some Tatars, traditional enemies of his clan. They recognized him. They put poison in his food. He made it home and died. What happened next shaped everything. The clan abandoned them. Without Yesuge, his widow and children were liabilities. The clan elders took their livestock, their followers, their protection. They left Hoelun and her children, including young Temujin, to die on the steppe. They nearly did. For years, the family survived by foraging, roots, berries, fish, small animals. They lived in desperate poverty, constantly moving, constantly vulnerable. And during this time, Temujin killed his half-brother. The Secret History describes it matter-of-factly. Temujin and his full brother, Khasar, caught Bektar, their half-brother, hoarding food. They shot him with arrows. Temujin was perhaps 12 or 13 years old. When his mother found out, she was furious, not because of the killing itself, but because it weakened the family. "You have no companion but your shadow," she said. She was teaching him a lesson. Unity was survival. Division was death. He would remember. The next years were education by suffering. When Temujin was about 15, a rival clan, the Taichiut, captured him. They put a wooden kangwei around his neck, a heavy collar that prevented sleep and made escape nearly impossible. He was displayed at their camp, a humiliated prisoner, probably destined for slavery or death. He escaped. The details vary between sources, but the essence is consistent. He waited for a feast day when the guards were distracted. He knocked down a guard with his kang. He hid in a river, breathing through reeds. A family from the Taichiut camp, moved by pity or calculation, hid him and helped him flee. He never forgot those who helped him. He never forgot those who humiliated him. Both would be repaid. In his late teens, Temujin married Borte, a woman he had been betrothed to since childhood. Shortly after the marriage, the Merkits, a neighboring tribe, raided their camp. They took Bort. This was revenge. Years earlier, Temujin's father had kidnapped a Merkit woman, Hoalun. Now the Merkits were taking Temujin's wife in return. The cycle of violence was unbroken. But Temujin was not his mother. He would not accept this. He called on allies. His blood brother, Jamuka, a powerful young chieftain. Togrul Khan, a lord his father had once supported. Together, they raised an army and attacked the Merkits. They won. Borte was recovered. She was pregnant. The child, Yochi, was born shortly after. No one ever knew whether Yochi was Temujin's son or the child of a Merkit captor. Temujin claimed him anyway, but the doubt would poison his family for generations. This campaign was Temujin's first taste of military leadership. If he was perhaps 19 or 20 years old, he had assembled a coalition, planned an attack, achieved his objective. He had also learned something crucial. Power came from followers. Followers came from victory. Victory came from organization, discipline, and the willingness to do whatever was necessary. The steppe was full of warriors, but warriors without structure were just raiders. Temujin would build something different. Over the next 2 decades, Temujin transformed himself from a minor chieftain into the ruler of all the Mongol tribes. The process was violent, complicated, and often personal. His blood brother Jamuka became his rival. They had sworn eternal friendship, had shared a cloak, had called each other Anda, the closest bond between warriors. But the steppe wasn't big enough for 2 ambitious men. Their conflict built slowly, through stolen followers and wounded pride, until it erupted into open war. The battles lasted years. Jamuka won some. Temujin won more. In the end, Jamuka was betrayed by his own followers and brought to Temujin in chains. According to the secret history, Temujin offered him mercy. They could be brothers again. All could be forgiven. Jamuka refused. He asked for death. A noble death, without blood being shed, as was fitting for a man of high birth. Temujin granted it. Jamuka was wrapped in felt blankets and crushed, or perhaps suffocated. His bones remained unbroken. His blood remained unspilled. It was, in the Mongol view, an honor. By 1206, all rivals were defeated or dead. The tribes gathered at a great assembly, a Kurultai, on the banks of the Onon River. They proclaimed Temujin the Genghis Khan. The title is usually translated as Universal Ruler or Oceanic Khan. The exact etymology is debated. What's not debated is what it meant. Every Mongol tribe, every clan, every family now answered to one man. The steppe was unified. The wars were over. Or, rather, the internal wars were over. The external wars were about to begin. Before we go further, I need to explain how Genghis Khan's army actually worked, because the Mongol military system was, in its way, as revolutionary as anything in history. The basic unit was the Arban, a group of 10 soldiers. 10 Arbans formed a Zun, 100 men. 10 Zuns formed a Mingan, 1,000. 10 Mingans formed a Tumen, 10,000. This decimal system was not new. Other steppe peoples had used it, but Genghis Khan did something different. He broke tribal loyalties. In a traditional steppe army, men fought alongside their kin, brothers and cousins and clan members. This built solidarity, but also divided loyalty. A commander might choose his family over his Khan. Genghis Khan reorganized his forces so that different clans were mixed together. Your Arban might include men from 5 different tribes. That your loyalty was to your unit, not your bloodline. And the penalties for disloyalty were absolute. If one man in an Arban fled from battle, all 10 were executed. If an Arban failed, the Zun commander was responsible. Collective punishment ensured collective discipline. The soldiers were also bound by written law, the yasa. This was Genghis Khan's legal code, covering everything from military tactics to inheritance to hygiene. It was reportedly written on scrolls and kept in the treasury. No complete copy survives. We know it only from fragments and second-hand accounts. But its effects were clear. The Mongol army operated with a discipline that stunned their enemies. They could march for days on minimal rations. Each soldier carried dried meat and fermented milk, enough to survive for weeks without supply lines. They could cover 60 or 70 miles in a single day, a speed unimaginable to armies that moved on foot. And they were archers of terrifying skill. Mongol children learned to ride before they could walk. They learned to shoot from horseback almost as early. By adulthood, they could fire arrows accurately while galloping at full speed in any direction. A Mongol army didn't fight like other armies. They didn't form lines and march forward. They swirled around their enemies like a pack of wolves, firing arrows constantly, feinting retreat to draw pursuers into ambushes, never giving their opponents a target to hit. Heavy cavalry would charge when the enemy was sufficiently weakened. But the killing had already been done at distance, and the killing continued after battle. This is where we return to the horror. Genghis Khan understood something about terror. He understood that a reputation for mercilessness was itself a weapon. If cities knew that resistance meant annihilation, they might surrender without a fight. If they knew that surrender meant survival, they might open their gates. So, he made examples. Cities that resisted were destroyed utterly. Cities that surrendered quickly were often spared. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was calculated. It was policy. It was also, by any moral standard, monstrous. In 1211, Genghis Khan turned his army toward the Jin dynasty of northern China. The Jin controlled a territory roughly the size of modern France and Germany combined. They had a population of perhaps 50 million people. They had walled cities, standing armies, centuries of civilization. The Mongols were perhaps 100,000 warriors from a total population of about 1 million. They were nomads. They had never besieged a major city. They shouldn't have stood a chance. Within 3 years, the Jin capital at Zhongdu, modern Beijing, had fallen. How? First, the Mongols learned. They didn't know siege warfare, so they captured Jin engineers and forced them to teach it. They acquired catapults, siege towers, techniques for undermining walls. Second, they exploited divisions. The Jin had enemies, vassals who resented them, minorities who had been oppressed. The Mongols recruited these groups, the Khitan people, who had once ruled northern China before the Jin conquest, joined the Mongols in large numbers. Third, they applied their standard tactics of terror. Cities that resisted were massacred. The survivors were used as human shields, driven before the army toward the next target. And fourth, Genghis Khan was patient. He didn't try to conquer everything at once. He raided, withdrew, raided again. He exhausted the Jin, economically and psychologically. When Zhongdu fell in 1215, the Mongols looted it for a month. The city burned for weeks afterward. Genghis Khan didn't occupy China at this point. He left vassal rulers in place, extracted tribute, and turned his attention elsewhere. The Jin would continue to resist for another 2 decades, but they were broken. Their eventual conquest by Genghis Khan's successors was inevitable, and the lessons of China would be applied to even larger targets. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire. Khwarezm was a vast Islamic state covering modern Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, and parts of surrounding countries. It was wealthy, cultured, militarily powerful. The Shah, Ala ad-Din Muhammad, commanded perhaps 400,000 soldiers. The caravan carried merchants, goods, and an ambassador. It was an overture of peace. Genghis Khan wanted trade, not war. The governor of the border city of Otrar seized the caravan. He accused the merchants of being spies. He confiscated their goods. According to most sources, he killed all of them. This was catastrophically stupid. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to the Shah demanding justice. The Shah had a choice. He could punish the governor, apologize, make reparations. He could defuse the situation. Instead, he killed the lead ambassador and sent the others back with their beards burned off. This was a declaration of war, but it was worse than that. It was an insult to Genghis Khan personally, an insult to his honor, his face, his authority. And Genghis Khan never forgave an insult. In 1219, the Mongols invaded. They came with perhaps 150,000 warriors. The Khwarezmians outnumbered them significantly. But the Shah made a critical error. He dispersed his forces across his vast empire, garrisoning each city separately. He believed the walls would hold. He believed the Mongols couldn't take fortified cities. He was wrong. The Mongols swept through the empire like a wildfire. Bukhara fell. Samarkand fell. City after city fell. And after each city fell, the killing began. The death toll is difficult to calculate, as contemporary sources give numbers that seem impossibly high. The Persian historian Juvaini claimed that 700,000 people were killed in the city of Merv alone. Other sources say over 1 million. Modern historians generally scale these numbers down, but even conservative estimates are staggering. The population of the Khwarezmian Empire may have dropped by 90%. Irrigation systems that had sustained agriculture for centuries were destroyed. Cities that had been centers of learning became ghost towns. Entire regions took centuries to recover. Some never did. The Shah fled west, pursued by Mongol generals. He died on an island in the Caspian Sea of pleurisy or despair. His son, Jalal ad-Din, fought on for years, a guerrilla resistance that the Mongols found more annoying than threatening. He was eventually killed in 1231. By then, Genghis Khan was dead, but his campaigns continued under his sons and grandsons. The destruction continued, and the question lingered, why? Why this level of violence? Why not simply conquer and rule? Let me try to explain, without excusing, the Mongol approach to warfare. The steppe was a harsh environment. Resources were scarce. Survival depended on livestock, and livestock required vast grazing lands. Conflict over resources was constant. In this environment, a culture of absolute deterrence made sense. If your enemies knew that attacking you meant not just defeat, but annihilation, they might not attack. If your reputation was fearsome enough, you might not have to fight at all. Genghis Khan had learned this lesson early. His father's death, his family's abandonment, his years of desperate poverty, all had taught him that weakness invited predation. So he made himself strong, and he made examples of those who challenged him. But there was also a practical dimension. The Mongols were always outnumbered. They conquered populations hundreds of times larger than their own. They couldn't garrison every city, suppress every uprising, watch every province. So they used terror as a force multiplier. If cities knew that resistance was suicidal, many would surrender without fighting. The Mongols would spare populations that submitted early and completely. They would incorporate skilled craftsmen, engineers, administrators into their empire. But any resistance, any hint of rebellion was met with total destruction. This created a powerful incentive structure. Submit immediately or die. And it worked. City after city surrendered. Population after population chose slavery over slaughter. The Mongols didn't have enough warriors to conquer the world by force. But they had enough terror. Does this justify anything? No. Understanding is not justification. Explanation is not excuse. But if we want to understand how one man with a modest army could reshape the entire world, we have to understand the methods. We have to look directly at what was done. And we have to recognize that, from a certain angle, it was rational. That's the most disturbing thing of all. As Genghis Khan's empire expanded, he faced a challenge that had defeated other nomadic conquerors. What do you do with cities? Nomads lived by herding animals across grasslands. Cities were fixed points, filled with farmers and craftsmen who couldn't move. The traditional steppe approach was to loot cities and leave, or to destroy them entirely. But Genghis Khan was advised by a Khitan scholar named Yelu Chukai. Yelu Chukai had served the Jin dynasty before it fell. He was educated, literate, sophisticated. When he was captured, Genghis Khan was impressed by his intelligence and brought him into his service. According to later sources, Yelu Chukai asked the Khan a question. You have conquered the Chinese Empire from horseback, but can you rule it from horseback? The point was that agriculture produced more wealth than herding. Like a living farmer who paid taxes year after year was more valuable than a dead farmer who could be robbed only once. This was not obvious to the Mongols. They had contempt for farmers, for soft people who stayed in one place and grew food in the ground. But Genghis Khan listened. He began to spare skilled workers, engineers, doctors, metal workers, scribes. These were extracted from conquered populations and put to work for the empire. He established the Yam system, a network of relay stations across his territories that allowed messages to travel at unprecedented speed. A dispatch could cross the empire in days rather than months. He imposed religious tolerance. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Taoists, all were allowed to practice their faiths. Clergy were often exempted from taxation. He established diplomatic immunity for ambassadors, a principle he honored even when violated by others. In some ways, the Mongol Empire was remarkably cosmopolitan. Persians served alongside Chinese. European craftsmen worked in the Mongol capital. Trade routes that had been interrupted for centuries reopened. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, allowed the first direct contact between Europe and China since the Roman Empire. Marco Polo's famous journey was only possible because Mongol rule made the Silk Road safe. But this cosmopolitanism was built on bones. The tolerance came after the terror. The peace came after the slaughter. The trade routes ran through graveyards. Genghis Khan was not a philosopher king. He was a conqueror who discovered, through advisors like Yelu Chukai, that living subjects were more profitable than dead ones. The lesson took time to sink in, and millions died during the learning process. Genghis Khan's personal life was, by any standard, complicated. He had 4 sons by his primary wife, Borte, Jochi, Chagatai, Ojede, and Tolui. These were his legitimate heirs, the men who would inherit the empire. But Jochi's paternity was always in doubt. Remember, Borte had been kidnapped by the Merkits. She was pregnant when recovered. Jochi was born shortly after. Genghis Khan claimed him as his own, but his brothers never fully accepted it. Chagatai, in particular, reportedly called Jochi a Merkit bastard to his face. The insult nearly tore the family apart. At a council to discuss succession, the brothers came to blows. Genghis Khan had to intervene. His solution was to pass over Jochi and Chagatai both. He named Ogedei, the 3rd son, as his successor. Ogedei was known as a diplomat, a moderate, someone who could hold the family together. It worked barely, but the tension between the lineages would persist for generations. Jochi died in 1227, the same year as Genghis Khan, under mysterious circumstances. Some sources suggest he was killed on his father's orders. Beyond his primary wife, Genghis Khan had hundreds of secondary wives and concubines, drawn from conquered peoples across his empire. Genetic studies in the early 2000s suggested that approximately 16 million men alive today carry a Y chromosome lineage that can be traced back to a single man who lived about 1,000 years ago in Mongolia. The researchers suggested this might be Genghis Khan himself. This would mean that roughly 0.5% of all men on Earth are his direct descendants. The number is staggering. But the explanation is simple. Genghis Khan and his male relatives had access to enormous numbers of women. Their sons inherited the same privilege. Over generations, the lineage spread. It's a reminder that conquest had biological as well as political consequences. The violence of the 13th century echoes in the genetics of the 21st. In 1227, Genghis Khan was in his 60s, old for his time, ancient for a warrior who had spent his life on campaign. He was not finished conquering. The Shisha kingdom, a Tangut state in what is now northwestern China, had been a Mongol vassal, but during Genghis Khan's western campaigns, they had refused to send troops. They had broken their oaths. This could not stand. Genghis Khan personally led the campaign against Xia. It was brutal even by Mongol standards. Cities were destroyed, populations were massacred, the Tangut culture was essentially annihilated. We know that the campaign lasted about a year. We know that Genghis Khan was present for most of it. And we know that he died before it was completed. How he died is uncertain. The secret history says simply that he fell ill and died. Other sources are more colorful. Some claim he fell from his horse and never recovered. Others say he was killed by a captive Xixia princess who had hidden a knife or some other weapon. One Persian account claims he was castrated by the princess and bled to death. We can't verify any of these stories. The Mongols kept his death secret until Xixia was completely destroyed. They killed everyone who saw the funeral procession to maintain the secrecy. What we know is that he died in August 1227, aged approximately 65. His body was returned to Mongolia and buried in an unmarked grave. The location has never been found. His final wish, according to some sources, was that his death be kept secret until his enemies were destroyed. "Let my death be hidden from the people," he reportedly said. "Let no mourning be made. Let no victory be lost." Even in death, the campaign continued. Genghis Khan's empire did not die with him. Under Ogedei, and then under subsequent Khans, the Mongols continued to expand. They conquered the rest of northern China. They conquered Korea. They invaded Russia, destroying cities from Kiev to Moscow. They reached the gates of Vienna before internal politics forced a retreat. They conquered Persia, Iraq, Syria. They sacked Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate and killing the Caliph himself. At its height, the Mongol Empire covered about 24 million square kilometers, roughly 16% of the Earth's land area. No contiguous land empire has ever been larger, and then it fragmented. The grandsons of Genghis Khan divided the empire into Khanates, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Yuan dynasty in China. These Khanates fought each other as often as they fought outsiders. Within a few generations, the unified empire was gone, but the effects persisted. The population collapse in Central Asia and parts of China and Persia took centuries to reverse. Some regions never fully recovered, but there were other effects, more ambiguous. The Mongols reopened the Silk Road. Trade between East and West flourished. Ideas, technologies, and diseases traveled faster than ever before. The Black Death may have been accelerated by Mongol conquests, spreading from Central Asia to Europe along trade routes the Mongols had secured. Gunpowder weapons, invented in China, spread westward through Mongol-controlled territories. The military revolution that would transform European warfare was partly a Mongol export. And the Mongol model of empire influenced later states. The Mughals in India were descendants of Mongol conquerors. The word Mughal itself derives from Mongol. The Russian czars borrowed administrative practices from the Golden Horde. Even the modern postal system owes something to the Yam, the Mongol relay network. Genghis Khan broke the world. But what emerged from the breaking was not simply destruction. It was transformation. So, what do we make of Genghis Khan? This is the question that historians and ordinary people have been asking for 800 years. Was he a monster? By modern standards, unquestionably yes. The deliberate killing of civilians, the destruction of cities, the enslavement of populations, these are war crimes by any contemporary definition. The scale puts him among the most destructive figures in human history. But modern standards didn't exist in the 13th century. Warfare was brutal everywhere. The Crusaders massacred the population of Jerusalem. European wars routinely killed civilians. Slavery was universal. Does this excuse Genghis Khan? No. Explaining context is not the same as excusing actions, but it complicates simple judgment. Was he a genius? Militarily, certainly. Or had he created an army that conquered more territory in 25 years than the Roman Empire conquered in 4 centuries? He developed tactics and logistics that remain state-of-the-art for generations. Politically, also yes. He unified the Mongol tribes, an achievement many had attempted and failed. He built an empire that, for all its violence, maintained coherence for over a century. Administratively, he was more sophisticated than the barbarian stereotype suggests. He adopted useful practices from conquered peoples. He promoted religious tolerance. He established rule of law, however harshly enforced. Was he a product of his environment? Absolutely. The steppe was unforgiving. The Mongol way of life was shaped by constant competition for scarce resources. The skills that made Genghis Khan successful, horsemanship, archery, tribal politics, were skills that any steppe leader needed, but many men had those skills. Only Genghis Khan built an empire. There was something in him, some combination of ambition, intelligence, ruthlessness, and charisma that was genuinely exceptional. Here's what I think we can say. Genghis Khan was a product of a brutal world who became more brutal than his world required. He took the logic of steppe warfare and applied it at a scale never before seen. He discovered that terror could substitute for numbers and used that discovery without restraint. He also built things. An empire, a legal code, a system of administration. He connected civilizations that had been isolated for centuries. The goods do not outweigh the bads. Nothing outweighs 40 million dead, but history is not a ledger. We can hold both truths at once. Genghis Khan was a catastrophe and a constructor, a monster and a maker. The discomfort of that duality is perhaps the most honest response. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan is a national hero. His face appears on the currency. The international airport in Ulaanbaatar bears his name. A massive statue, 40 meters tall, stands outside the capital. Tourists pose beside it, dwarfed by the steel horse and rider. For Mongolians, he is the founder of the nation, the man who united the tribes, the source of national pride in a country that spent centuries under foreign domination. The Russian Empire controlled Mongolia. Then, the Soviet Union controlled it. For much of the 20th century, even speaking positively about Genghis Khan was dangerous. Now, he is reclaimed, celebrated, commodified. Is this troubling? Perhaps. It's certainly strange to see the architect of such destruction honored with vodka brands and tourist kitsch. But nationalism is rarely concerned with moral complexity. Every nation has founders whose hands were bloody. The question of how to remember them, how to balance pride and honesty, is never simple. And there's one more thing. The grave. 800 years ago, Genghis Khan was buried in an unmarked location. The soldiers who dug the grave were killed. The slaves who carried the body were killed. The exact site was never recorded. For 8 centuries, people have searched. Archaeologists, treasure hunters, historians. They have theories and rumors. Some say he was buried on Burkhan Khaldun, the sacred mountain where he hid as a young man. Others say elsewhere. The Mongolian government has restricted excavation in sensitive areas. Many Mongolians believe the grave should remain undisturbed, that some secrets should stay buried. There's something fitting about this. Genghis Khan in life was a force of exposure. He broke down walls, revealed hidden cities, dragged civilizations into violent contact with each other. Nothing was protected from him. In death, he remains hidden. The man who exposed everything exposed nothing of himself. His bones lie somewhere beneath the Mongolian grass. Unmarked, unknown. The steppe keeps its secrets. In the aftermath of the Mongol conquests, something strange happened. The world got quieter. In Central Asia, cities that had been centers of commerce and learning fell silent. Trade routes that had hummed with activity went still. Agricultural regions that had supported millions returned to grassland or desert. Some historians have detected this silence in unusual data. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica show a drop in atmospheric carbon during the 13th and 14th centuries. Less burning, less agriculture, fewer people. The forests grew back. In parts of China and Central Asia, land that had been farmed for millennia returned to wilderness. One study suggested that the Mongol conquests removed enough carbon from the atmosphere to have a measurable effect on global climate. We killed so many people that the Earth cooled down. This is the scale we're dealing with. Not just history, geology, climatology, the very composition of the air, and yet. The Mongol Empire also created connections. It brought silk to Europe and gunpowder to the West. It enabled the journeys of Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta. It transmitted technologies and ideas across boundaries that had been closed for centuries. The world that emerged from the Mongol century was not the same world that had existed before. It was smaller, more connected, more aware of its own vastness. Genghis Khan did not intend any of this. He was not a visionary seeking to unite humanity. He was a conqueror seeking power, wealth, and the submission of his enemies. But intentions are not the same as consequences, and the consequences of his life reshaped the planet. When I think about Genghis Khan, I think about those ice cores, the strange record of absence, the silence in the data. 40 million people lived and worked and breathed and died. Their deaths are preserved in ice thousands of miles away, in the chemistry of ancient air. They are not forgotten. The earth remembers. We should remember too, not to celebrate, not to condemn, but to understand. This is what humans are capable of. This is what one man, with the right skills and the right circumstances and the right ruthlessness, can do. The knowledge is uncomfortable. It should be, but it is ours. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this story, and I'll see you on the next one.